We live in a society that is becoming increasingly more contentious. At the core of this is a struggle among people who are trying to make sense of the world in their own way. But what's troubling is the struggle between those who question and promote information based on reason and those who are guided more by their feelings and agendas when questioning and promoting information. Dr. Esha Lovrić has seen enough. And so she has started sharing her thoughts about the importance of critical thinking on the social media platform Threads. She's a social scientist and sociologist whose thoughts I was curious about, and she agreed to have a conversation with me from Croatia. So here's my conversation with Dr. Esha Lovrić. Thank you so much for joining me on The Way Forward. How are you?
I'm doing good, Eddie. Thank you for having me here. I am looking forward to our talk.
Yeah. So first of all, tell me what led to this public conversation you started having about critical thinking?
Hmm. My relationship with critical thinking goes back to being a child, first of all. I'm a migrant, so getting into moving around different countries, I had to work out a lot of social problems and figure that out. So that's something that has been a big part of my life. Um, Throughout my upbringing, and this is something that I had to do. I had to find solutions for the problems, and so I really believe in its significance for human beings in finding social success. What really got me to kind of bringing this to the public was that my more formal relationship with critical thinking started when I started my Ph.D. about 10 years ago, and I entered the academic world. The thesis is a critical thinking document, so I learnt it and then I taught it to students inside the university. That was my job. And critical thinking in social sciences is about exploring how much our perceptions are based on our personal experiences. And I think that that's something that should not be hidden behind university walls. So here I am, trying to make it accessible to everyone, particularly in this information era that we're in, and everybody needs this as a basic skill.
So certainly I've been a fan. What kind of response have you gotten on Threads from others about your commentaries?
Yeah, so it looks like people are really hungry for critical thinking. It is something that everybody's talking about. I definitely have. It's been received well. Of course, you've got your people who are resistant and rejecting anything that anyone says that they don't like, and that's to do with your biases and a lack of critical thinking. But we can get into that a little bit later. And I don't really get engaged too much with people who are not engaging in good faith, because that's very important to critical thinking, that we are open and trying to engage to learn and understand, not to shut down conversations, because that doesn't help anyone. But overall, it seems like people are responding really well. People want to learn it. People want it to be talked about. Everybody is kind of affected by these conversations that aren't going so well right now in the modern world. So it seems like people really get that it's time for this to be kind of some sort of on the national agenda across the world, really.
You outline five reasons that people need to understand the value of critical thinking. Share what you believe to be the top three of those reasons and why.
hmm I think the first one, it contributes to mental health and psychological resilience. So, as a social scientist, I was in the university. I'm responsible for training people who are on the front line and who are working with very vulnerable people to increase psychological resilience. So, learning CT as a skill will enable you to do that over time. So, it helps you learn to engage with your emotions, because our emotions are what guides our feelings and subsequently how we perceive things. And the more you begin to become comfortable with this, the less threatening our emotions become. So critical thinking is most likely to occur after some sort of cognitive discomfort. So that discomfort
Mm.
pushes you to reflect more deeply. There's no reason to reflect deeply unless you're a little bit uncomfortable. So we tend to feel this discomfort when something challenges our existing beliefs, or when we say something that is considered wrong or questionable by people or groups that we care about or that matter to us. So that's why online, it's kind of, we're going around in these loops because we're engaging in conversations with people that don't actually matter to us in our real lives. So it doesn't really force you to have to change your opinion. So usually we're only triggered to think about our thinking if we have a personal reason to do so. And over time, this repeated discomfort and reflection on problems and learning how to think about what we're thinking and asking ourselves deeper questions, we might end up backing ourselves up stronger, but this time with logic and reason because we've really thought about it, or we might end up changing our opinion and what we think. So that's developing cognitive confidence. The more you do that, the more you engage in that process of thinking about your thinking and thinking about why you're thinking a certain way or how it had an impact on somebody. What consequences did it have? How did it affect me? How did it affect someone I care about? That's when you begin to actually come up with reasons to actually come up with a solution that actually works out for us.
I
Sorry.
wanted to go back to engaging with your emotions because that, to me, that's probably one of the most fascinating parts of this. Um, and I'll be open about this. So I have a therapist, and one of the things that she and I have been talking about lately is we've been talking about mindfulness. And one of the questions I had for her was, okay, at that split second when something gets on my nerves and I start to feel a bit hot under the collar, how do I stop myself? And
Mhm.
so one of the things that she talked about was, checking in with yourself and just stopping and taking deep breaths and that sort of thing. It seems to me, reading your thoughts about critical thinking and then combining that with the way we interact with each other online, it seems to me that critical thinking is that tool that people can use to really slow themselves down when they have that post that they're going to angrily respond to. So for yourself, you said that you don't engage with people who disagree with you in a certain way.
In a certain way,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, in a certain way. And so it seems to me that part of what you're saying is that critical thinking is that tool that can really get us to engage with others, or at least engage with the topic in a way that's going to save us, honestly, from stressing ourselves out or from going off the deep end. Am,
That's right.
am, am I in a neighborhood with that one?
Yeah, well, I mean, critical thinking is cognitive effort. We have to apply some cognitive effort.
Mm,
Unless our thoughts are automatic, like an expert in a certain area has been researching one topic for so long, so frequently, and so recently that their automatic thoughts on the topic is quite easy. It's not really cognitively effortful. That's why we should probably listen to some people who research things for a long time and more
mm,
consistently because it's kind of automatic for them to think about all those things and it's based on recency of information. Whereas for other people, people are having to slow down and think about what they're thinking about, and that's a little bit more cognitively effortful. So yes, you do have to be able to pause and kind of activate a cognitive behavior that slows you down, and you have to be a bit more conscious about that. Um, and that's not easy online as well because people, I mean, psychologically, as we can see, people are reactive, and as soon
mm.
as they feel emotionally stirred, they will respond with an automatic thought rather than applying that second order, cognitively more effortful critical thinking.
Mm. In your opinion, is it okay for someone to say, is it okay for someone to feel like it's okay to react, but you just have to, like you said, I find this term cognitive effort. I find it to be an interesting term, and it sounds exhausting,
It's,
but
yeah.
and it is because I mean, a long time ago, a friend of mine told me that it takes more effort to be positive than it does to be negative, and so um, with people and reacting to particular situations. Is it okay to acknowledge those things? That number one, it's okay for me to feel upset about something that I just saw. Now let me just slow down and give what I'm reading some real thought. And is it okay to acknowledge that? And you just did acknowledge that cognitive effort does take a lot of work and it can be exhausting. Is that a way for, in your opinion, is that a way for people to kind of forgive themselves and then take a deep breath and then go forward with their critical thinking? Do those sound like reasonable
Yeah,
steps?
absolutely. I mean, the funny thing is, I think people think it's really funny that people think that I teach critical thinking, sometimes I see this online because I'm trying to teach them tools to win an argument. And actually, that's not even why I'm even doing this. I'm actually doing it to demonstrate that socially, our perceptions are so diverse. And critical thinking in itself about social diversity is accepting how diverse we are with our opinions and feelings based on our history. So actually, it's really logical to accept that we do have feelings and different triggers and emotions. That's the most logical thing I ever heard of about human beings. So I think it's really interesting how people think, oh no, I want to learn critical thinking because I want it to be able to go through steps to prove that someone is wrong in what they think. And actually, the whole point of it is to be able to go through a set of I guess it's just a way to apply some cognitive behavioral therapy on yourself, really, and be a little bit more aware of your own thoughts and reactions about somebody else's feelings. I think it's really normal to respond to stimuli. I get upset about things, and we will get more upset about things that are close to us, have some sort of emotional foundation to them, have something connected to our histories. I mean, we should always feel, and we do not want a world where we are less feeling.
This is true. This is true. You're listening to The Way Forward. I'm Eddie Francis, and we're talking to Dr. Esha Lovrić, and she is a social scientist and sociologist who has started a public conversation on Threads about critical thinking. And I love that people think that you teach critical thinking. So here's an idea. Maybe you should. So the post though that you did on Threads that really got my attention and really got me to follow you is a post that you did about the difference between critical thinking and conspiratorial thinking. And so we had a big conversation in the US leading up to the presidential election about folks who, had all these conspiracy theories about one candidate versus another candidate, and people who tried to think critically about what was going on just got exhausted, in all of this. So, in thinking about this, just so that people have the language and understand that there is a real thought process here, what is the difference between a critical thinker and a conspiracy theorist, or at least someone who engages in critical thinking versus someone who engages in conspiracy theories?
Yeah. So, from my perspective, where we often hear conspiracy theorists call themselves the critical thinkers. I've heard that
Yeah.
a number of times. And the first thing that we just have to think about is that when we become negative and resentful, which we can often see if you go down the real rabbit hole of conspiratorial thinking, this is not a healthy mental state, and this is not something that a place you want to be. So that in itself should show you that something's not going right. But in simple terms, critical thinking is curious, and conspiratorial thinking generally is suspicious. And this is probably a quite a distinct difference. And I think where it gets a little bit confusing and the lines can get a little bit blurred is because both start at kind of questioning the status quo, and what you see is not what really is. And both start at kind of wanting to look underneath it or behind an issue or around it. And that's why it can kind of get a little bit blurred, because it's like, oh, well, this is what I'm doing, so I'm a critical thinker because I'm just digging deeper. And that's a great start. Of course you should do that, because what we see is not always what is. Now, while they might start at the same point, what's interesting is the gap between them kind of widen as they continue their research, in inverted commas, because the way that they're actually engaging in the information or the research that they're finding is kind of the distinction as well. So a critical thinker, if you're doing that ethically, you want to learn and you want to understand better. That's the whole point of engaging with information. You want to know more. And so as they explore, they become should become excited about knowledge and learning diverse ways of thinking about a topic. It's intriguing. Knowledge is very intriguing. And how things come to be is very exciting to learn about. Then this process kind of pushes you in your critical thinking journey to branch out in other directions that you didn't even expect. And your original ideas sometimes are proven to be wrong. And in the end, it's an incredibly enlightening experience. I actually think that everyone who engages in any sort of learning in a healthy way, we realize how much of a joy, if you're doing it right, learning and obtaining knowledge can be. Whereas with conspiratorial thinking, I guess starting with that suspicion, you've already decided what is true. And as you start researching, those strong biases kind of dictate what information they become attracted to. So they end up reconfirming existing beliefs over and over again and just continue in a loop. And anything that they find that contradicts their beliefs, they also view as suspicious, and then they reject those ideas. And it doesn't even matter how logical the ideas are, they're just rejected outright. And they don't really question their own thoughts. And that's something that I've seen continuously. There's not kind of this self-reflection. Hey, am I really right? Is what I'm thinking, can there be another version of a truth? Can there be two things that are right, three things that could be simultaneously right? So there's not kind of this flexible, open thinking. And I just wanted to add one more thing about that. For example, conspiratorial thinkers are particularly distrustful of institutions. And healthy critical thinking might also identify reasons for institutional distrust. But there are clear differences on how the topic is approached. For the critical thinker, they might engage in a healthy discussion by exploring pros, cons of systems and institutions and rules and regulations. They look at it fairly and flexibly. They might be confident with some things or a little bit unsure and uncertain about other things. In contrast, the conspiratorial thinker often rejects all new knowledge outright and assumes that everybody is in on it and they're the only ones who might be able to see the real truth.
So what this makes me think about, this makes me think about, and I almost hate to bring it up, but it's the best example I can think about. But this makes me think about the presidential election. I have friends who were engaged in what I believe to be conspiratorial thinking about Kamala Harris, and they just kept spewing all of these conspiracies and how they believed her real path to her real advancement happened, and it was all very insulting to her. Um, and when anyone challenged them on that, they would get angry. And not only would they get angry, they will double down and triple down and quadruple down. And then it turned into insults. It turned into saying, well, you know what the problem is? You're just an idiot. And all of you are fools and that sort of thing. But I think the part that really stands out to me is it wasn't just not only the not questioning, but those of us who I believe, and I would like to think of myself as a critical thinker, we were okay with questioning ourselves. We were okay with saying, okay, well, maybe I should think more deeply about this. Maybe I should investigate this a little bit more. Maybe I should look a little bit more into her past to understand what kind of person she is. And the other thing that strikes me is that those of us who were engaged in again, what I believe to be critical thinking, we were always looking for solutions, and we showed a lot of patience in our discussions because we were always willing to step back and accept that we could be wrong about something. Whereas the people who I believed were engaged in conspiratorial thinking, they weren't patient at all. And they definitely didn't seem to want to find solutions. They always seemed to believe that someone else was responsible for the solutions. And so, does that seem like it aligns reasonably with your observations?
Yeah, I mean, I think this declining trust in institutions or big powerhouses, as well as the media's contribution and the algorithms' contribution playing on people's emotions, really is creating a very anxious environment that's really hard, a hard space for communities and friendship groups and families to operate in. I mean, if you don't take the reality of how you are engaging with information into your own hands and stop feeding into what these external sources are feeding to you, you're going to be reacting like this a lot in your personal spaces with your friends and your family members. It is not healthy and it is not good. And I really think that that is a result of that anxiety. And I think that across societies as a whole, people are kind of reducing or diminishing trust in institutions. And with conspiratorial thinking, I think that who might not have been so strong in their beliefs before. Say, for instance, someone who had a strong or had some ideas or views about things that they were passionate about or emotionally connected to. Their thoughts might not have been so strong, but they're also the kind of victims to these algorithms as well, exploiting their fears as well and introducing them to other thinkers who are like them at just a click of a button. And previously, they may have just been alone in their views, but then, or an outcast in the community, and they may be able to be convinced a little bit more easier to kind of come to the table and think differently. But now that's kind of not that attractive because they've joined groups where there's like permanent online groups where everyone kind of have this consolidated views, which is very strong and powerful. That's a powerful voice. So they can bring that back with a bit more strength. And that's what I see potentially happening, and how this is creating kind of this disjointness between what you're doing online and then bringing these thoughts back into your homes and into your friendship circles.
Okay, and I want to be clear with the audience that it is not my intention to make this a good guys versus bad guys type of conversation, and certainly not to turn it into a so-called political conversation. But that was an example that really hit me. So I wanted to get an idea of the way forward. So I have a two-part question here. So number one, it seems that part of what happens with critical thinking is that you often find yourself having to battle zero-sum thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first part is there a way for people who do think critically, who are open to questioning, who are open to all possibilities, intellectual flexibility, and that sort of thing? Is it possible to help manage people who have zero-sum thinking? The other thing, in your opinion, do you think it is possible for there to be a paradigm shift in society to spread more critical thinking, especially looking at some of the barriers that you brought up, things like algorithms online? And you and I offline, we had a conversation about the role that media plays into this. So first thing, zero sum, is there a way to manage that? Second thing, do you think that there is a way to cause a paradigm shift to engage, to spark more critical thinking?
Hmm. Look, it's a tough question and hard to know how to tackle such a huge kind of cultural shift we're seeing, or that we have seen, because changing someone's thinking patterns requires trust and a balance of emotional and logical intelligence. But I just wanted to say that we've always thought differently to our neighbors in all of history, and the difference is that people are just hearing them now online, through the way that the way the news is shared. So I think we need to become smarter than the algorithm and fight to protect our sanity, because we are smart. We can be smarter. We need to reclaim our minds. And that's really what I'm trying to do here, trying to show people how they can actually have sovereignty over their own mind. They absolutely can be the leader of their mind if they want to, or if they can just become conscious of how much their mind is going to fail them if they don't kind of take a little bit more of an aggressive stance against how easily their biases can take control. So, I mean, separate from the screen, spend more time with real people you care about. This is a fundamental protective factor. Social connections, this is the stuff that's going to make you wake up and actually start to engage in those conversations that are really exciting, and thrilling, and being able to hear diverse perspectives and be flexible. We're flexible when we are talking to people and we're interested in the conversation and we have a reason to want to connect. We're going to be flexible because we don't want the conversation to end. We don't want the conversation to break down or the relationship to break down. But the more we spend online, and statistically we are spending more time online than off, the more we're going to lose those natural critical thinking skills that we develop by just engaging with people. So I think you said, what's the way forward then? How can we create the paradigm shift in critical thinking, and is it possible? I do think it's possible, as people start to see the outcomes of a lack of healthy critical thinking. I do think that we can already see it. There's more public discourse now about what's happening. I mean, even you and me now, we're talking about it. And I think that human beings are particularly resilient. And as soon as they start to feel the negative outcomes of their choices, I do think that they will push back. I think that's a great thing. And I'm particularly interested in the comment threads. And I have a look at what people are saying, and I like to kind of weigh up the numbers statistically of who's saying what. And I really do see a shift occurring. There's less tolerance for a lack of tolerance of diversity. I really feel like I can see that. But we must know that since online activity is here to stay and the reliance on it is increasing rapidly, the opportunity for critical thinking is at risk. So we have to take the matter into our own hands. And my tip is use media in healthy ways. Don't let it use you, and make sure you are periodically completely and totally disengaging from all media.
This has been great stuff. If anybody wanted to find out more about you, how can they find out more about your work and how they can engage more in critical thinking?
Yeah, so I am running my social media account. So I'm on Instagram and Threads. You can find me via my website as well, dreshalovrić.com. You can sign up to my newsletter and just navigate to the tab at the top, and I share all of my critical thinking tips in that free newsletter every week. And right now I'm developing courses as well as my public service. I am going to bring them all out, and they will be ready for the public at some point. This is by popular demand. So there's a lot of things going on, and I think that we can all work together to kind of shift the way that we think and kind of start an intellectual revolution, really.
Excellent. And the spelling, especially for the website, is ESHALOVRIC. ESHALOVRIC. So, Dr. Esha Lovrić, thank you so much for joining me on The Way Forward.
Thank you, Eddie. It's been my pleasure.
We'll be back with Go Forward on The Way Forward on WBOK, what New Orleans is talking about.